Okay, so I'm going to try not to be so long-winded with this video because I have quite a few cities to go over. But man, the deeper I go into this history and the further back I go, the more questions are raised. So, here we go. Alright, no matter what year you were born, or even what generation you come from, if you were born in America, American history kind of goes something like this. Sometime in the 1600s, England was looking for an opportunity to improve its dominance and enforce its presence in the world. So they sought expansion in North America by granting a series of charters to scope out and claim the land of North America in the name of England. So in between three different monarchs, James I, James VI, and George III, those guys issued out a lot of charters to come over to North America and create the America we know today. Slavery is inserted mildly and briefly here, only to be spoken of no more until after the late 1700s. Alright? So the story goes, according to the narrative, after being in this new land for a little while, England passed a bunch of taxes on the land and the people, which caused them to become really upset, and this is what caused the American Revolution. Alright? This American Revolution would ultimately separate this new land founded by England from England as its own separate entity and country. And thus America was created from this narrative. And now I'm going to insert slavery around here, again, according to the narrative, and they had a terrible, terrible life. It was terrible, completely horrible, horrendous. This until the Emancipation Proclamation, and now they're freed by Abraham Lincoln. Oh yeah, and now Martin Luther King and civil rights. Oh, but heavy on the Martin Luther King and heavy on the civil rights. Only here is where we're going to go into detail for African American history. Now, with that pipeline of funnel-styled history having many other events completely overshadow various major historical events concerning African Americans, creates the result of a generous amount of Americans, no matter the color, believing that since people of color came to America on slave ships, according to the narrative, that they only lived enslaved on this land in different plantations all the way until the Emancipation Proclamation. And only after that were they able to go out and attempt to build cities for themselves. In reality, there were many black established and thriving cities as far back as the 16th century. So, where were blacks living in the early 1800s? So, the first city I'm going to go into is Marshalltown, New Jersey. The date of establishment is heavily speculated on. The dates go between 1803, 1834, and 1836. But Marshalltown, New Jersey is along the Delaware River and is said to be named after Thomas Marshall, who purchased the land in 1934, according to the narrative. So, there were a lot of houses, schools, churches, stores, gardens, cemeteries, which of course, okay, we can say the city was thriving. Thomas Marshall, the guy who, of course, founded the city, he died in 1856, and that's when creditors seized the land and the assets. So, What's left of the town today is nothing more than a house, a church, a schoolhouse, and 2 cemeteries. So that's that for Marshalltown. Next on the list we have Freetown, New York, which is also known now as East Hampton, New York. The date of establishment for this one is also heavily speculated on. So it's believed to have been an establishment before 1790. According to the 1790 Census Bureau, it's reportedly recorded that East Hampton's residence was 1,299 whites, 99 slaves, and 99 people classified as all other free people. Interesting wording there for all other free people. According to the narrative, it's believed that after slavery was abolished in 1827, a lot of the slaves at the time escaped and relocated to East Hampton. From here, the city is known to have flourished all the way until about the 1870s, when this guy named Arthur Benson pretty much started buying a bunch of land around the area and relocating a lot of the people from the area to East Hampton. And it's heavily speculated that he pretty much did the exact same thing to East Hampton, pretty much enticed the people to move away. And well, what's left of Freetown today? Virtually nothing. I mean, maybe a cemetery and a church called St. Matthew's Chapel, which has an interesting convoluted history as well, because it was moved in 1976 to what they call East Hampton Point. So there's Freetown, or East Hampton, New York, in between 1790 and the early 1800s. Okay, so now we're looking at Freehill, Tennessee. And Freehill, Tennessee was established in 1816, pretty much pre-Civil War era. According to the narrative, the freed slaves of a woman named Virginia Hill, she freed her slaves, and I'm assuming out of the kindness of her heart, gave them her property, which was a lot of land. And according to the narrative, the city consisted of about 300 residents, 2 grocery stores, 3 clubs, 2 eating establishments, churches, the school, all of this. But it said pretty much the town started to decline during the 1960s due to a substantial number of residents deserting the farmland and moving to much more prosperous areas for economic gain. That is a reoccurring theme. Okay, not to dwell so heavy. Next, we're gonna go to Lakeview, Illinois, established in 1818. Alright, so with Lakeview, it's believed that a group of African Americans migrated from North Carolina after the War of 1812 and established a city in 1818, otherwise known as the Pond Settlement. Now, this city, of course, thrived with many homes and schools, grocery stores, etc. And it did pretty well all the way up until 1872, where a lot of the holdings were sold off and a lot of whites were buying the land around Lakeview. So it's also heavily speculated that this town of Lakeview is one of the many towns that, of course, was people were either forcibly removed or lured away. This is pretty much what Lakeview looks like today. The results of what happened to this town, again, heavy speculation going on here. That's Lakeview. All right, next up we have Davis Bend, Mississippi, in 1820. So according to the narrative, Joseph Davis, which was Jefferson Davis's brother, he sold the plantation, according to the narrative, in 1866 to a black man named Benjamin Montgomery on a $300,000 loan. Over time, it's believed that Catastrophic floods ruined the crops and cut a channel across the peninsula, turning Davis Bend into an island. So in 1876, when Montgomery failed to make a payment on his property, Jefferson took the land back. However, something else is interesting with Davis Bend, Mississippi, is it's also believed that his son ran the land until 1979, and we're talking about Benjamin Montgomery's son, and they're saying pretty much that there was a downward turn on the community, and most of the community members and the tenants, they left to participate in the Kansas Exodus, which is something else I'll be covering as well. And that's Davis Bend, Mississippi. Heavy speculation on the establishment between 1860 and 1866. Yeah, but it existed, and this is what it is now. Next up is Seneca Village, New York. Alright, this was established in 1825. We all know Seneca Village as Central Park. But from 1825 to 1832, massive amounts of black people bought lots of land in that area. So by the 1950s, Seneca Village was thriving. Around that exact same time, the city of New York began to plan a large municipal park. So in 1853, they erected a law known as eminent domain that allowed them to take the land from the owners for public use. So when they did that, literally more than 1,600 people, all their families, were displaced. And by 1857, they officially had everyone removed, and everyone that did not, of course, participate in any of the monies that was offered, they were forcibly removed. So here is Seneca Village, aka Central Park, today. Man, does this thing get dark. I cannot stress that I will have another video for all of these cities specifically dedicated to each city, because the histories the deeper and further back you really do go with this, it does take a lot of turns that you definitely wouldn't expect. But carrying on, right over in same place, New York, in 1828 we have Sandy Ground, New York. Alright, with this one, John Jackson is said to be the first African American to purchase land of this particular time. However, Sandy Ground is said to first appear on record stating all the way back to 1799. However, of course, the city did well and it thrived all the way up until the 1930s, where there was a great fire that destroyed much of the property and the community. But it still kept going. But then there was another fire, a great fire, in 1963. Fortunately, Sandy Ground still exists. Next up is Lyle Station, Indiana, in 1830. According to the narrative, this community dates from 1849. However, the first settlers arrived to this community in the 1830s, and it was named Lyle Station to honor Joshua Lyles, the African American who migrated with his family from Tennessee to Indiana. Interesting information about this city is it actually had a railroad depot, a post office, a lumber mill, lots of churches, and lots of houses. The usual. However, this city flourished all the way until the Great Flood of 1913. And this flood destroyed most of the town. And it said, according to the narrative, of course, that most of the residents left for economic reasons. So, here's Lyle Station. The other thing that I found out about Laos Station that I kind of want to hit on just to throw out there is there was a lot of radiation experiments going on to the people from the government, and it's not really talked about much. So I'm definitely going to be covering that too. Just felt like it was necessary. But next up on the list is Robert Sellerman, Indiana. It was established in 1830. The date of establishment, however, is heavily speculated. But according to the narrative, after the Nat Turner Rebellion, many of the people migrated from North Carolina to the city. And from the 1830s, they migrated all the way into the early 1900s. According to the narrative, though, in 1870, by that time, farming afforded fewer opportunities, and apparently fewer than 6 families remained in the city by the mid-1920s. To this day, the only remains are a chapel and its adjacent cemetery, maybe a few other significant structures. Another disagreed establishment date is Beach Settlement, Indiana, which is, again, they're saying in 1836. But by this time, it had a population of over 400 residents. And according to the narrative, by the 1920s, fewer than 6 families remained. And this is what it looks like today. A whole lot of nothing. However, with Beach Settlement, I just found it really hard to find out exactly what happened to this city. But again, that video will be coming soon. Next up, we have New Philadelphia, Illinois. That's founded in 1836 by Frank McWhorter. This town faced a lot of economic racism and discrimination. Railroads at this time in any community or city were said to, of course, promote expansion and growth and development. Economically, New Philadelphia, however, seemed to continuously be bypassed on the railroad system. In many adjacent cities and towns, they received railroads. New Philadelphia did not. It's said that by 1865, because of the lack of railroad, the city began to decline. Now, New Philadelphia is interesting, even more so to me a little bit, because the end result is, what happened to this city? When I get a little into it, the narrative states that it reverted to farmland. Interesting. The whole city that was flourishing for more than 30 years turned into farmland. Okay, anyway, and according to the narrative, it was by the 1920s, pure farmland. Okay, I'm gonna let New Philadelphia go, but what? Okay, wait, no I'm not, because I also found out that in 1940, nothing at the town remained above ground. What does that even mean? So was the town ultimately buried? And another thing, it's sometimes known as Ghost Town. Alright, I'm done with New Philadelphia, Illinois. Alright. And that's where I'm going to end this video for now. For the sake of not making it way too long. So far, we've covered 11 Black-owned and established thriving cities all across America in the early 1800s. I must say though, it is interesting in comparison to the information that we are given. Not saying that this information is intentionally held away from us or anything, but it also equally isn't being just freely given out either. But, you know, hope you guys liked this video. Let me know what you guys thought about it. And of course, if you can add more cities to this list, it would be great. And yeah, namaste.
Yeah.